The warehouse smells like disinfectant and something else, something metallic that makes Linda's stomach turn. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead, casting everything in a sickly green glow. 3 metal tables, surgical instruments laid out like a dinner service. "Please," she whispers, her voice hoarse from screaming. "I have kids. I have grandchildren." The man in scrubs doesn't look at her face. He's checking her pulse, writing numbers on a clipboard. Behind him, another woman lies unconscious on the middle table, chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. "This one's healthy," he says to someone Linda can't see. 51, no major surgeries. Kidneys should be perfect. Linda tries to move her arms. The restraints dig into her wrists. This can't be real. 3 days ago, she was eating breakfast on a cruise ship with Ryan, laughing about the terrible buffet eggs. Ryan who brought her here. Ryan who held her hand while leading her to die. The man in scrubs picks up a scalpel. Linda Morrison was folding Gary's shirts when she found the receipt. Tiffany Co., $3,200. Date stamped 2 weeks before their 24th wedding anniversary. She never got anything from Tiffany's for their anniversary. 3 months later, Gary moved out, took his golf clubs, his coffee maker, and 24 years of Linda's life. Left behind a lipstick tube that wasn't hers and a forwarding address to Mackenzie's apartment across town. "You need to get back out there," her daughter Jessica kept saying. Easy for Jessica to say. She was 32, married to a guy who still brought her flowers on random Tuesdays. Linda stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. 51, laugh lines that used to be called smile lines, grey roots she'd been meaning to touch up for weeks. When did she become invisible? That's when her co-worker Sandra started pushing. Sandra, who'd been divorced twice and had stories about every dating app known to mankind. "Trust me," Sandra said, waving her phone during their lunch break. "I met Carl on this one. 6 months now, and he's already talking about moving in together." Linda picked at her salad. "I wouldn't even know what to write. That's what I'm here for." 2 glasses of wine later, they were uploading photos to something called DateSpark. Linda chose the picture from her nephew's wedding, the one where she actually looked happy before Gary started working late every night. Her first week online was a disaster. Bob sent pictures nobody asked for. Steve's entire personality was hating his ex-wife. Marcus asked for money by message 3. Then Ryan Hensley liked her profile. His first message came at 7:42 p.m. on September 28th. "I see you love mystery novels. Ever been on a cruise? It's like a floating Agatha Christie story minus the murder, hopefully." Linda stared at the message for 10 minutes before responding. He seemed normal. His profile showed him on construction sites, at family gatherings, regular guy stuff, not trying too hard like the others. She wrote back, "Never been on a cruise. Do people really get murdered on them, or is that just in movies?" His response came fast. "Lowell, mostly just bad buffet food casualties, though I did hear about a guy who got food poisoning so bad he thought he was dying. Close enough?" They talked every day after that. Ryan worked construction, had his own small company in Indianapolis, close enough to be real, far enough to explain why they hadn't bumped into each other at the grocery store. He'd message her during lunch breaks, complaining about difficult clients. She'd send him pictures of her disasters in the kitchen, her sourdough starter that died 3 times, the casserole that looked nothing like Pinterest promised. "Your kitchen experiments look better than anything I make," he texted one evening. "I'm basically living off gas station sandwiches and shame." "I could cook for you sometime," Linda typed, then deleted it, too forward. They'd been talking for 3 weeks. But Ryan was different. He remembered things. When her cat Mittens had a vet appointment, when her boss Dr. Patterson was being particularly impossible. He'd ask about her day like he actually cared about the answer. October turned into November. They moved from the app to texting, then phone calls. His voice was warm, a little raspy, like he'd spent years shouting over construction noise. "I've got a weird question," he said during one of their nightly calls in early December. "My brother works for Carnival Cruise Lines, gets me these insane employee discounts. I was thinking, what if we finally met in person, but made it special?" Linda's stomach dropped. Ryan, we haven't even had coffee yet. I know it sounds crazy, but Linda, I'm 48. You're 51. How much time do we want to waste being careful? We've been talking for 3 months. I feel like I know you better than I knew my ex-wife after 10 years. She should have said no. Every dating safety article would scream no. 5 days to Cozumel, he continued, leaving from Galveston. I can cover most of it with the discount, probably 70% off. If it's weird, the ship's big enough we can avoid each other. But if it's not weird... Linda closed her eyes. Gary never would have suggested something spontaneous. Gary planned their vacations 18 months in advance and complained about the cost the entire time. When? She heard herself asking. January 15th, Martin Luther King weekend, so you'd only miss 3 days of work. Her son David lost his mind when she told him, Mom, you can't be serious, you've never met this guy. Jessica was gentler but just as worried. At least meet him for lunch first, please? But Linda had already bought new sundresses, 3 of them, and a swimsuit that didn't make her look like somebody's mother. She got her hair highlighted for the first time in years. Here's what you need to understand. Linda Morrison wasn't stupid, she was lonely. And loneliness makes you ignore warning signs that seem obvious from the outside. January 15th, 2024. Linda drove to Galveston, 5 hours of second-guessing herself. She almost turned around twice, but Ryan kept texting, Drive safe, can't wait to finally hug you. She saw him at the port entrance holding a small sign that said, Linda, with a smiley face drawn in blue ink. He looked like his pictures, maybe carrying an extra 10 pounds, but who wasn't after the holidays? His smile was exactly like she'd imagined. When he hugged her, he smelled like Irish spring soap and something woody. You came, he said into her hair. Almost didn't, she admitted. I would have understood. This is crazy, but good crazy, right? The ship was enormous. The symphony of the seas, bigger than anything Linda had ever seen. Their cabins were on deck 8, 3 doors apart. Keeping it respectful, Ryan said with a wink that made her feel 17 again. The first night they had dinner at the steakhouse on deck 7. He wore a polo shirt that was slightly too tight. She spilled cocktail sauce on her new dress. They laughed until her sides hurt. Day 2 was at sea. They played mini-golf badly, watched a comedy show that wasn't funny but laughed anyway. He held her hand during sunset. For the first time in months, Linda felt beautiful. If you're worried about where this story's heading, make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next will remind you why you should never ignore your gut instinct. But here's the thing about predators. They're patient. Ryan didn't rush anything. He let Linda fall for him naturally, completely, because the deeper she fell, the easier she'd be to control. Day 3 they docked in Cozumel. Linda had been looking forward to this part. The ship's excursion desk offered trips to Mayan ruins, snorkeling tours, beach clubs with unlimited drinks, tourist stuff but safe, organized. I found something better, Ryan said over breakfast. This amazing local place on TripAdvisor, real Mexican food, not cruise ship garbage. He showed her his phone. Mariscos El Paraíso, 5 stars. Look at these reviews. Hidden gem. Best fish tacos in Mexico. Where the locals eat. Linda hesitated. The ship's staff had been clear about staying in tourist areas, staying with groups. How far is it? Maybe a 15-minute walk. Come on, Linda. When's the next time you'll be in Mexico? You want to eat at Señor Frog's with a bunch of drunk college kids, or do you want a real experience? She looked at the reviews again. They seemed genuine, real people, real photos of incredible-looking food. Okay, she said, but if it's sketchy, we're coming right back. Deal. They left the ship at 11 a.m. The port area was exactly what Linda expected. Jewelry stores, t-shirt shops, bars with American music and English menus, crowds of cruise passengers clutching maps and sunscreen. Ryan led her past all of it, toward the real town. The streets got narrower. The signs switched from English to Spanish. The tourists disappeared. You sure you know where we're going? Linda asked. GPS says we're close, Ryan said, but he wasn't looking at his phone anymore. They turned down a side street, then another. The buildings got older, more rundown. A man on a motorcycle watched them pass, saying something in Spanish to his friend that made them both laugh. "Ryan, I don't like this. It's just around this corner." But when they turned the corner, there was no restaurant, just an alley that dead-ended at a rusted metal door. Two men stood outside it, leaning against the wall. One of them had a medical cooler at his feet. Linda stopped walking. "There's no restaurant here." Ryan's hand tightened on hers. Not romantic anymore, restraining. "Ryan?" He didn't look at her, just nodded to the men. The taller one opened the door. The room beyond was dark, but Linda could smell it from here, disinfectant and something else, something that made her stomach turn. "I want to go back to the ship," she said. "Too late for that, Linda. The thing about nightmares is your brain refuses to accept they're real." Even as Ryan dragged her toward that door, even as one of the men grabbed her other arm, Linda's mind kept insisting this was a mistake, a misunderstanding. The needle went into her neck before she could scream. The last thing she heard before the darkness took her was Ryan's voice, different now, an accent slipping through that she'd never noticed before. 51 years old, good health, no major surgeries. Kidneys should be pristine like I promised. Linda woke up to the sound of someone crying. Her head felt like it was filled with concrete. Her mouth tasted like copper and chemicals. When she tried to move, restraints cut into her wrists and ankles. She was in a warehouse. Industrial lighting buzzed overhead. 3 metal tables arranged in a row like an assembly line. Medical equipment she recognized from doctor visits, monitors, IV stands, trays of surgical instruments. On the middle table, a woman lay unconscious, younger than Linda, maybe early 40s, blonde hair matted with sweat. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. A man in scrubs walked between the tables, checking monitors, making notes on a clipboard. He moved like this was routine, like these women were inventory. "She's awake," someone said behind Linda. "Good. We can start the prep." Another man in scrubs approached her table. He had kind eyes, which somehow made everything worse. "Please don't struggle," he said in accented English. "It will only make this harder for you." "Where am I?" Linda's voice came out as a whisper. "Shh. Try to stay calm. I have children, grandchildren. Please, I just want to go home." He didn't answer, just started checking her pulse, her blood pressure, writing numbers on his clipboard like she was a patient here for a routine procedure. Here's what Linda learned in those first few minutes of consciousness. This wasn't random. This was a business. The kind of business that requires medical equipment, trained staff, and a steady supply of healthy organs. According to the World Health Organization, there are approximately 130,000 organ transplants performed worldwide each year. But there are over 1.5 million people waiting for organs. That gap between supply and demand? That's where people like Ryan make their money. The going rate for a healthy kidney on the black market is between $150,000 and $200,000. A liver can bring in over $400,000. Do the math. Linda was worth more in pieces than she'd ever been whole. But here's the part that still haunts investigators who worked this case. They keep the victims conscious during harvesting, awake, aware, feeling everything. Because anesthesia can damage the organs, make them less valuable. Linda watched them prepare the unconscious woman on the middle table, watched them set up the equipment, the monitors, the collection containers. "How many?" Linda whispered. The man with kind eyes looked up from his clipboard. "What?" "How many women like me?" He was quiet for a long moment. "You're number 47. 47 women. 47 mothers, daughters, sisters who'd trusted someone like Ryan, who'd gotten in a car or on a plane or walked down an alley thinking they were about to start a new chapter of their lives. "The cruise ship," Linda said. "They'll be looking for me." "Ryan filed a report this morning," the man said, not unkindly. "Said you fell overboard during the night. Very tragic. These things happen more often than people think. I know this is hard to hear, but these stories need to be told. Subscribe to help us bring awareness to these cases that mainstream media won't touch." But Linda Morrison wasn't just another statistic. Because while the men in scrubs prepared their instruments, while they calculated the value of her organs, Linda was doing something they hadn't expected. She was fighting back. Not physically. The restraints made that impossible. But mentally, she was staying sharp, staying aware, memorizing faces, voices, details. Because Linda Morrison had spent 15 years working in a dental office, and she knew medical procedures when she saw them. More importantly, she knew when procedures were going wrong. The woman on the middle table started convulsing. "Miguel," the kind-eyed man called out. "She's rejecting the sedation." "Impossible, I gave her the correct dosage." "Look at her vitals." Monitors started beeping. The woman's body jerked against the restraints. Her breathing became labored, desperate. "She's going into cardiac arrest," Miguel said. "Save her. We need those organs intact." They rushed to the middle table, injecting drugs, shocking her heart, trying to bring her back. But Linda could see what they couldn't, or what they didn't want to admit. The woman was dying. And in their panic to save $250,000 worth of organs, they made a mistake. They forgot to watch Linda. The kind-eyed man had left his keys on the equipment tray next to her table. When he rushed to help with the emergency, he knocked over his clipboard. It scattered across the floor, and in the chaos of trying to save their investment, nobody noticed Linda slowly working her left hand free from the loosened restraint. Nobody noticed her fingers closing around those keys. The woman on the middle table flatlined at 3:17 p.m. Cozumel time. Linda watched them pronounce her dead, watched them argue about who was responsible for the lost profit. She never learned the woman's name. But that woman's death gave Linda something precious, a chance, because when you're worth $200,000 in parts, and when the harvest is supposed to happen in a specific order to keep the organs viable, and when one of your victims dies unexpectedly, well, that creates chaos, and chaos creates opportunities. The argument started immediately. $200,000. Miguel slammed his clipboard down. "Gone because you can't calculate a proper sedative dose." "She had an allergic reaction," the kind-eyed man shot back. "How was I supposed to know?" "Your job is to know these things, Carlos." Carlos. Linda filed the name away with everything else she was memorizing. Carlos, who gave her water when she asked. Carlos, who looked guilty every time he checked her pulse. They wheeled the dead woman away, leaving 2 empty tables. Miguel stormed out, still cursing in Spanish. 2 other men followed him. That left Carlos alone with Linda. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said quietly. "What's your real name?" Linda asked. He looked surprised. "Carlos." "No, your real name. Before you started cutting up women for money." Carlos stared at her for a long moment. "Dr. Carlos Mendez. I used to work at Hospital General in Mexico City." "Used to?" "I made some mistakes, lost my license. This was supposed to be temporary, just until I could get back on my feet." He laughed bitterly. 3 years ago. Linda had worked with doctors for 15 years. She knew the look of a man who'd lost his way and couldn't find the road back. "That woman who died," she said. "She had a family too." "I know. Kids, probably. Maybe grandkids." "Please don't." "What would they think of you right now, Carlos?" He turned away, but Linda kept talking. She had to keep talking. It was the only weapon she had left. "My daughter Jessica just had a baby. My first grandchild. Little girl named Emma. She's 6 months old now, just starting to sit up on her own." Carlos was cleaning instruments, but his hands were shaking. "Emma smiles every time she sees me, reaches out her little arms like I'm the most important person in the world. What do you think happens to her when I don't come home, Carlos?" "Stop." "She grows up wondering what happened to her grandmother. Maybe blaming herself somehow, thinking if she'd been a better baby, maybe I wouldn't have left." "I said stop." But Linda couldn't stop. This was her one chance. "How many grandmothers have you killed, Carlos? How many little girls are going to grow up thinking their grandmas just disappeared?" Carlos dropped the scalpel he was cleaning. It clattered to the floor. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered. "Then don't." He looked at her then, really looked at her, not at her organs or her medical chart, but at her face, at the tears she'd been holding back for hours. "They'll kill me," he said. "Maybe, But you're already dead, Carlos. You just haven't stopped breathing yet. What happened next took exactly 17 minutes. Carlos walked to the door and locked it from the inside. Then he came back to Linda's table and began undoing her restraints. "Listen carefully," he said. "There's a service tunnel behind this building. It leads to a storm drain that opens 2 blocks from the police station. You follow that tunnel. No matter what you hear behind you, you don't stop, you don't look back." Linda's hands were free now. Carlos moved to her ankle restraints. "Why are you helping me?" "Because my daughter would be about your age now," he said. "And I want to pretend she'd have someone like you fighting for her if she ever needed it." The restraints fell away. Linda's legs were weak, shaky from hours of being immobilized, but she could stand. Carlos handed her a bottle of water and a small bag. "Antibiotics," he said. "You've been given several injections. Your system needs to clear them out." Linda stared at him. "Come with me." "I can't. Someone has to stay to delay them. Make them think you're still here." Outside, Linda could hear voices, Miguel returning with the others. "The tunnel entrance is behind the building under a metal grate. Can you run?" Linda tested her legs. "I can run." "Then go, now." She made it to the door before turning back. "Carlos, go. Tell them I said thank you." Linda slipped out the back exit as voices echoed from the front of the building. The alley smelled like garbage and motor oil. The metal grate Carlos described was exactly where he said it would be, hidden behind a dumpster. She lifted it and dropped into darkness. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for her shoulders. Water dripped from somewhere above. Something scurried past her feet in the dark. But Linda crawled forward, following the thin stream of daylight that marked the other end. Behind her she heard shouting, men's voices, angry, getting closer. She crawled faster. The tunnel seemed to go on forever. Her knees scraped against concrete. Her hands were raw and bleeding, but she could see the light getting brighter, could smell fresh air mixed with car exhaust. Almost there. The voices behind her were in the tunnel now. Flashlight beams bounced off the walls. They were coming fast. Linda reached the storm drain opening just as the first gunshot echoed through the tunnel behind her. She pulled herself up onto the street and ran. 2 blocks to the police station, Carlos had said, but Linda Morrison was 51 years old, hadn't run anywhere in years, and her body was full of sedatives and God knows what else. She made it 1 block before collapsing. A taxi driver found her lying on the sidewalk, bloody and incoherent, clutching an empty water bottle like her life depended on it. He could have kept driving, could have pretended he didn't see the crazy American woman having some kind of breakdown. Instead, he stopped his car and called for help. Sometimes the difference between life and death comes down to the kindness of strangers. Linda Morrison was taken to Hospital de Cozumel at 4:43 p.m. on January 18, 2024. 67 hours after she'd walked down an alley with a man she trusted. She was alive, barely but alive. But her fight was just beginning. Back in Indianapolis, Linda's daughter Jessica was losing her mind. Linda had missed her daily check-in call. Then she'd missed her scheduled call with her son David. The cruise line said she'd been reported as a man overboard incident, but they couldn't provide any details. "That's impossible," Jessica told the Carnival representative on the phone. "My mother doesn't just fall off ships. She won't even stand near the railing because she's afraid of heights. Ma'am, I understand your concern, but according to our records, Ms. Morrison's traveling companion filed the report himself. These incidents are more common than people realize." Her traveling companion, who she met on the internet 3 months ago. Jessica hung up and immediately called the FBI. Special Agent Martinez had seen cases like this before. Romance scams that turned deadly weren't uncommon, especially targeting divorced women over 45. But the organ trafficking angle was new. "The problem is jurisdiction," he explained to Jessica and David. "Your mother disappeared in Mexican waters, was allegedly seen last in Cozumel. We can investigate Ryan Hensley here in the States, but if she's in Mexico—" "She's not dead," Jessica said firmly. "I know my mother. She's too stubborn to die." Martinez had been about to close the case file when the call came in from Cozumel police, an American woman found on the street, claiming she'd escaped from organ traffickers. claiming she'd been taken there by someone named Ryan. Linda was heavily sedated when Martinez arrived at the hospital, but she was conscious, alive, and angry as hell. "Ryan Hensley," she said the moment she saw the FBI badge. "Indianapolis, DateSpark profile, he's done this before." "Ma'am, you need to rest." 47, Linda interrupted. "I'm number 47. There are 46 other women whose families deserve to know what happened to them." Martinez pulled out his notepad. Linda told him everything. Every detail she could remember about the warehouse, about Miguel and Carlos, about the setup. She described the medical equipment, the other victim, the systematic way they operated. But most importantly, she told him about Ryan's phone. "He was always texting someone during our calls," she said. "Quick messages he thought I didn't notice. And once, when we were having dinner on the ship, his phone rang. The caller ID said, Miguel, Mexico." Martinez had been chasing organ trafficking networks for 6 years. He'd seen the victims, interviewed the families, but he'd never had a survivor who could provide this level of detail. Within 12 hours, he had a warrant for Ryan Hensley's arrest. They found him in his Indianapolis apartment, packing a suitcase. 3 fake passports, $47,000 in cash, and a cell phone full of evidence. The phone contained text conversations with Miguel dating back 2 years, photographs of victims, financial records showing payments of $50,000 per successful delivery. But the most damning evidence was a spreadsheet titled Potential Targets. It contained 47 names, ages, medical histories, and contact information. Divorced women, widowed women, women who'd joined dating apps after major life changes, women who were lonely enough to trust, healthy enough to be profitable. Linda Morrison was entry number 47. Entry number 48 had a tentative date scheduled for February 14th, Valentine's Day. Ryan Hensley had been planning his next victim even while Linda was strapped to that table. At his arraignment, Ryan looked nothing like the charming construction worker Linda had fallen for. His lawyer tried to argue that he was just a middleman, that he hadn't physically harmed anyone. "Your Honor," the prosecutor responded, "Mr. Hensley delivered 46 women to their deaths. The fact that he didn't personally wield the scalpel doesn't make him any less responsible for their murders." Ryan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on 46 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Miguel and his team were arrested in a coordinated raid by Mexican and American authorities. The warehouse was shut down, but investigations revealed it was just one site in a network that stretched across 3 countries. Carlos Mendez, the doctor who helped Linda escape, was found dead in his cell 3 days before he was scheduled to testify. The official cause of death was listed as suicide. Linda doesn't believe that for a second. Linda Morrison returned home to Indianapolis on February 3rd, 2024. She'd lost 22 pounds, had scars on her wrists from the restraints, and couldn't sleep without nightmares. But she was alive. The media attention was intense. Every true crime podcast wanted to interview her. Netflix offered a 7-figure deal for her story rights. Publishers lined up to ghostwrite her memoir. Linda turned them all down. "This isn't entertainment," she told Jessica. 46 women died. Their families don't need to see their loved ones' deaths turned into binge-watching material. Instead, Linda did something different. She started a foundation called Second Chances Safety. It's dedicated to educating women about online dating dangers, but not in the victim-blaming way most safety programs approach the topic. Linda's program is different because Linda understands something most safety experts don't. Telling women to be more careful doesn't help when the predators are this sophisticated. Ryan Hensley wasn't some obvious creep sending inappropriate photos. He was patient, charming, psychologically manipulative. He studied his targets, learned what they needed to hear, built genuine emotional connections before springing the trap. You can't defend against that kind of predator by simply being more cautious. You defend against it by understanding the patterns. "These men aren't random," Linda explains in her presentations. "They target women at specific vulnerable moments, recent divorces, deaths of spouses, empty nest syndrome. They know exactly when you're most likely to ignore red flags because you're desperate for connection." Linda's program teaches women to recognize the setup, not just the danger. The too good to be true stories about discounts and connections. The rush to meet in person before you're ready. The isolation tactics that separate you from friends and family who might ask uncomfortable questions. Most importantly, she teaches women to trust that voice in their head that says something feels wrong. I ignored so many warning signs, Linda says, not because I was stupid, but because I wanted so badly for this to be real. I wanted to be the woman who took a romantic risk and had it pay off. But your gut instinct isn't trying to ruin your fun, it's trying to save your life. Since the foundation launched, Linda has spoken to over 15,000 women. She's prevented at least 12 situations where women were about to meet online dates under suspicious circumstances. One woman called Linda's hotline from an airport, about to board a plane to meet a man in Costa Rica who'd offered to pay for her entire trip after 2 weeks of messaging. Another called from a parking lot, sitting outside a restaurant that didn't exist, waiting for a date who was 20 minutes late and not answering his phone. Linda talked both of them into going home safe. But the work isn't just about prevention. Linda also advocates for the families of trafficking victims, helping them navigate the complex international legal system when their loved ones disappear abroad. She testified before Congress about the need for better coordination between American and foreign law enforcement agencies. She's worked with the State Department to improve how missing persons cases are handled when Americans disappear overseas. And every January 18th, the anniversary of her escape, Linda visits Carlos Mendez's grave in Mexico City. She brings flowers and stays for exactly 17 minutes, the same amount of time it took him to save her life. "I know you can't hear me," she whispers to his headstone, "but Emma took her first steps last week. She's walking now, Carlos. She's going to grow up knowing her grandmother, because you chose to be brave for 17 minutes. Here's what Linda wants every woman watching this to understand. The dating apps aren't going away. Loneliness isn't going away. The need for human connection after loss or divorce isn't going away. But predators like Ryan Hensley are counting on you being ashamed to ask questions, too polite to demand proof, too eager for romance to trust your instincts. They're counting on you prioritizing politeness over safety. Don't. Ask for references. Video chat before meeting. Tell friends where you're going and when you'll be back. Meet in public places you choose, not places they suggest. And if someone gets angry when you ask reasonable safety questions, that's not a red flag, that's a billboard. The right person for you will understand why you're being careful, Linda says. They'll want you to be safe because they care about you. Anyone who pressures you to ignore your safety instincts doesn't love you. They're hunting you. Linda Morrison survived because she got lucky, because Carlos Mendez had one moment of conscience, because a taxi driver decided to help instead of driving past. She survived because of a series of small miracles, but 46 other women didn't get those miracles. Linda's message isn't that online dating is evil or that you should never trust anyone new. Her message is simpler than that. Your life is worth more than anyone else's convenience. Your safety is worth more than seeming rude or overly cautious, and when that little voice in your head whispers that something isn't right, listen to it. Because that voice isn't trying to ruin your love story. It's trying to make sure you live to have one. If you're currently in contact with someone online who's pressuring you to meet in an isolated location, or travel somewhere to meet them, or who gets angry when you ask reasonable safety questions, please call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-888-373-7888. It's free, confidential, and available 24/7. And remember, the person who's right for you will want you to be safe. Anyone else isn't worth the risk.